Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning. I'm going to have to... Is this on? Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Norton School. Can you hear me? Almost. Welcome to the Norton School. Happy homecoming. Thanks for being here. I'm Stephen Russell. I'm the interim director of the John Endorsed Norton School of Family and Consumer Sciences. I'm also the director of the Francis McClellan Institute for Children, Youth, and Families. It's been a great morning. I'm really glad to welcome you all here. Thanks so much to the Norton Advisory Board for a great conversation this morning. Thanks also, we had a terrific tour of the Lang Family Observation Laboratory the last hour, last several hours. Thanks to Erica Ruig. Is Erica here? Erica makes everything happen in the Francis McClellan Institute. Thank you, Erica. Thank you also, Noel Card, the Assistant Director of the Institute, and Ann Master George. Can you all wave for all of the work that you did in planning this? And of course, thank you. And thanks to Julie Longstaff and Camille Hooper and all the amazing Norton staff who put all this together, and of course to the Family Consumer Sciences Council of Alumni and Friends. And also thank you and greetings from Soyeon Shim, who, leaving no stone unturned, wants to be sure that you know that she is thinking of all of us today from her much colder place on the planet. She is a hard act to follow, and I'm really honored to have the opportunity to do that. And so thank you all. I think it's kind of fun that we have a great mixed room from the dean and some senior faculty to junior faculty and students and alumni, everyone who's here to either for real or pretend that you're back in college. So that's really great. And I'm so glad to have to be able to introduce Chuck Raison, who is in the Department of Psychiatry, who's the Lang professor in Department of Psychiatry at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, Tucson, but is also joint appointed with us here in the Norton School of Family and Consumer Sciences, month 13 that he's been here. So it's just over a year. And his work focuses on inflammation and the development of depression in response to illness and stress. And his work is about translating these neurobiological processes into novel behavioral interventions, one of which is compassion meditation as a preventive health strategy. And you may have heard of him. He knows about, he's the mental health expert for CNN Healthcare, and he's a regular in frequent media outlets, and so he's going to speak with us today. I think this is we just had a terrific conversation about the future of the Norton School. I think it's a great way to think about the Norton School, which is all about the science and future of people. Try that one on. Okay, Chuck Raison, who will speak to us about compassion training as a pathway to lifelong health and well-being.
Well, hello. Whoa. All right, let's move down the tie. Second. Okay, is that, I still got a lot of ring. Can we dry me out? Can we sober me up and dry me out from my talk this morning? Okay, I got to keep an eye on the clock. I promised to try to keep this to 30 minutes. I sometimes get overly excited. I'm so honored to be here. It's been such a wonderful experience to transition from Emory University in Atlanta to Arizona. I'm a longtime lover of the desert and great admirer of the work that this place is doing, and I hope to be able to contribute to that. So let's roll up our sleeves and get started. We often think of healthcare, wellness, disease, as things that exist in their own little domains. But I want to suggest to you, especially as we begin to think about compassion training, that larger issues are afoot. And these issues are relevant not just to healthcare, but to our survival. And of course, no survival, no healthcare. This is the idea, one of the 2 or 3 ideas I'd like to leave you with in this talk, which is that our survival as a species will depend on finding better ways to deal with our enemies. Okay, and I'm going to show you what that has to do with compassion meditation and what that simple idea has to do with health and disease. So I don't need to rehearse for you the multiple ways in which we have been tending to deal with our adversaries lately brings us to pain and to grief. You can see it on an international scale. You can see it within the country. So this is actually now from 2009. That's the stock market crash that resulted when the Democrats and the Republicans could not come to some sort of agreement. Hi, Barry. And you see, even on that level, you see these clear problems. Drops in stock market produce profound disruptions in people's mental well-being. And of course, perhaps directly relevant to a lot of what we look at the Norton School, the place where conflict hurts worse, and we've known this since the Greek tragedians, is within the family. Families are the greatest source of caring and support, and they also can be the greatest sources of pain and danger. Right? In all these ways, how we cope with those who oppose us and those whom we oppose dictate, I want to suggest to you, not just how healthy or sick we're going to be, but whether or not we're going to find a way to move forward as a species on this planet at this real time. At this time. So, if I said that our survival as a species depends on finding new and better ways to deal with our enemies, we have to ask ourselves, first of all, who are our enemies? You better figure that out first. We're going to deal with them. Who are they? Right? And here something gets really strange. Is there any more quintessential enemy than two people who spend years trying to kill each other? I would say no. In the heat of war, nothing is worse than the enemy. You don't have to think, you just go back to World War II and what was said about the Japanese in the United States. Profound anger, hatred, real enemies. But as with many things in life, extremes tend to turn in on each other, right? And so there's an odd enemy phenomenon, and it's been seen in every war probably forever, but certainly in the modern world. So in the Civil War, reenactments didn't start back in the 70s and 80s. They started reenacting the Civil War in the 19th century. And of course, in the old days, the people that were reenacting were the guys that actually did the shooting, right? But over time, they started dying off. And at the end, there were only enough old guys left to form a single unit. So this single unit, half Union, half Confederate, march around, right? From going to be enemies, they had become almost brothers because of the experience they shared. Their eneminess joined them together in a way that was very, very profound. You don't have to reach back to the Civil War to see this. In fact, there have been therapy programs for Vietnam vets with post-traumatic stress disorder based on reuniting them with the people that they were trying to kill and who were trying to kill them. This is an overwhelming experience for these guys, transformative, changes their lives, discovering that they have this profound love for their deepest enemies. So it actually suggests, in fact, that these guys must not be our real enemies. If they're really our enemies, they would be our enemies. But in fact, when you look more closely, things get complicated. This is a picture of a guy named Atisha, who lived in the 1100s in India, and who was really the compiler, founder of the meditation technique that we've secularized for the cognitively based compassion training, what we call CBCT. And it's worth a couple of comments on his life because it illustrates the fact that enemies are tricky and enemies may have some value. So Atisha spent the first part of his life becoming the greatest scholar of Buddhism in India. And then in early middle age, he realized that all this scholastic stuff wasn't getting him towards enlightenment, and he turned his back on it. And he became the greatest meditation master of his age. And then as an old guy, he started getting entreaties to come across the mountains from India to Tibet because Buddhism had fallen away in Tibet, and they sent these emissaries, please come reestablish Buddhism. He did not want to go, he did not want to go, he did not want to go, and these stories have mythical elements. Some of the gods and devils and stuff showed up and basically leaned on him. So he agreed to go to Tibet. And then he heard something that was so distressing, so upsetting, that he actually contemplated suicide because he heard something that he realized would completely destroy his life's work if he went to Tibet. He learned something about Tibet that was so distressing that he gave up all hope. He realized all would be lost because of this one thing about Tibet. So suppose you had to move to California or New Mexico or someplace, what kind of things would make you feel that terribly about the new place you were moving to, right? I don't know. Public transportation doesn't work, people are unfriendly, But this was catastrophic for him. And this is what he learned. What he learned about Tibet was that if he went there, everybody was nice and he'd be treated well. And upon that, he despaired, because he realized that if that was the case, his life's work was finished. So he really struggled for a while, and then he hit upon an ingenious solution to his problem. He began to scour the lowlands of what is now Bihar, looking for the most unpleasant, idiotic, arrogant, churlish, lying, cheating son of a bee that he could find. A person universally reviled for being arrogant, stupid, conniving, backstabbing, right? And he found the person, and he made that person his tea server. Now, a tea server would be with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So you'd always be in the presence of this absolutely unbearable human being. Having found that person, he departed happily for Tibet and reestablished Buddhism in Tibet. Right? And the idea behind that, and this is the far extreme of what CBCT is about, is that enemies, without meaning to, can sometimes be our greatest source of benefit. That in any situation that is antagonistic, there is, from multiple perspectives, a way forward that is highly beneficial. That would be my secularized version of saying the same thing. What he needed was, he needed patience to continue toward enlightenment. And if he didn't have somebody that was opposing him and giving him trouble, he wouldn't be able to practice patience, right? But it highlights the fact that our enemies are not our real enemies. So who are our real enemies? This is the second important point I'd like to leave you with today, that is a foundational understanding within CBCT, cognitively based compassion training. Our real enemies are not those who oppose us. Our real enemies are the anger and hatred we feel towards these people. Now, this is a profound, profound paradigm shift, if you really let it in and rattle your cage a little bit. You say, God, was that true? And the answer is, yes, it's absolutely true. There's no doubt at all that it is true. Just as seeing those two Vietnam guys hugging each other with tears in their eyes suggests that they can't be each other's real enemies, because they're kind of enemies or brothers or lovers. No. On the other hand, we know that the anger, the upset, the depression, the frustration, the envy, the jealousy, this whole very potent, stinking stew of negative emotionality that our enemies evoke in us, that is really problematic. I do not have time today to show you the thousands and thousands and thousands of studies that show that anger and hatred and its twin brother depression do everything bad you could possibly imagine, and do it in all circumstances. So people that are depressed, that are angry, that have negative emotions, of course they don't have happiness much. Of course, that is almost a definition of depression. But we also know that that emotional stance profoundly increases your likelihood of dying young. People that feel that way, on average, die 10 years, 15 years younger than other people, right? And it greatly increases your risk of developing any number of illnesses. And then just to add insult to injury, it turns out that once you feel like that, there's no good way of dealing with it. So you can be like the folks on top and let it out, or you can be like the guy on the bottom and bottle it up. If you let it out, you're more likely to die of heart disease. If you bottle it up, you're more likely to die of cancer. It's a true fact. Isn't that amazing, right? So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? There's not the solution is to somehow get underneath and transform the feelings, right? We've not yet discovered good coping mechanisms. Lest you think that these emotions that can get stirred up, and this is in highly contentious situations, are not deadly. And I just did a thing, and if you go back yesterday, you can read about this on CNN.com. I did a blog about the presidential race and how not to die if your candidate loses. Because it turns out, study after study has showed that if you look at mortality rates in large cities that have big sports teams, your city loses the Super Bowl, your series loses the World Series, the soccer cup, death rates spike. Now, ladies, You'll be glad to know it's only guys that are stupid enough to die over a sporting event. You're safe. Dudes, Gus, no, it's bad, right? So even something as silly, this is how seriously we take our competitive, antagonistic metaphors. They can kill us, right? God knows. Think about when it really is up in your face, right? So, what this suggests, of course, is if these negative emotional states that arise in various kinds of confrontational social interactions, if they're deadly, if they're misery-producing, if there's no good way to deal with them once they arise, can we identify novel strategies for reducing these feelings and related things like rejection and defeat, all of which have been to predict the development of mental illness and physical illness? Can we find novel strategies? Well, yes. I am not a Tibetan Buddhist, but I've had a long, long association with a remarkable series of folks from the Tibetan Buddhist world. So I knew when we began to think about that question that the Tibetan Buddhist tradition had this remarkable training program originally developed by Atisha, the guy who went looking for the tea server, that is a radical way of reconceptualizing how you see your relationships with the world, and does it in a way that transforms perceptions of threat and danger into perceptions of win-win opportunity. I mean, it's really what it is in modern speak, right? They would say it differently. So I put this picture up. Of course, the Dalai Lama has been behind a lot of this stuff and a big, big inspiration for us. But I just wanted to highlight Geshe Lobsang Tenzin Nagy, my long-term deep friend and collaborator, who's also adjunct faculty now at the Norton School, and who, when we decided to take this task on, I agreed to do the science part, and I'm not the meditation guy, and he developed cognitively based compassion training, the technique. There's people in this room, like Leslie, I see, who is now in training and has done, many, many, many hours of all sorts of very rigorous meditation to begin to try to master the CBCT technique. Let me just talk for a second about what it is. So I'm not going to tell you week 1 we do this, week 2 we do that. Let me try to give you a flavor of its 2 main elements, right? So first we take people and we help them just learn to meditate, how to quiet the mind, how to learn to focus on their breath. But then there's 2 elements that are really specific to the compassion training. And the first is the development of equanimity. Let me give you an example. Okay, so let me show you what equanimity is about rather than give you a formal definition. So let's take a look at this lady here. It's too bad. If this is a group full of young men, I could ask this question. I'd say, guys, does this really race your engine? Talk to me about what this person, what does it make you feel like, right? And I'd say, are those feelings different than these feelings? Same person, right? Just to highlight the fact that equanimity is about not clinging as tightly to the things that you instinctively love, not ignoring as thoroughly the things you instinctively ignore, and not the things that you instinctively dislike. Finding a way to recognize that although we have these very powerful reactions, they don't actually reflect reality, a la Bridget Bardot. All right, that's one. Let me show you another equanimity. All right, now suppose I said to you that your job was to take this baby and strangle it to death and watch it die. You feel your heart racing a little bit? Just think for a second what that would be. I'm telling you, you have to do it, okay? Killing this little baby in front of your eyes. If you had to do that, would it make you feel like this? But that's what we did, because the baby is Osama bin Laden. Now, we might have to kill Osama bin Laden. That's not the point. The point is that when you begin to see the world this way, you still have to do things. Some things you don't like to do, but you don't do them the same way, right? Osama bin Laden goes down, you may be glad he's dead. But you don't it's not that, right? You change it. All right. So that's a flavor of what equanimity is like. What about, the compassion itself? So I want you just to look at a picture for a second. It's very hard to look at, okay? Now, that makes you feel a certain way. And how that makes you feel is closely related, I think, to what the great, great compassion meditators feel when they meditate. Because the second piece of this compassion meditation is to really train people, beginning with people that they instinctively love, to generate a super heartfelt sense of endearment. A sense that when other people suffer, it hurts. And that because of that, you want to help relieve them of their suffering. And also that you think about yourself and the suffering that you inflict upon yourself and how it hurts. You want to be freed from that. So there's all sorts of exercises that work to develop that emotion. Right? It's a fascinating, first part of the meditation is all kind of cognitive. You know, you're kind of challenging. Well, why do I dislike her so much? Or why do I love Jim so much? It's just, balancing things out. The second part is then to dive deep into your emotions and try to, it's like trying to take an atomic bomb. So often our emotions are like atomic bombs, right? And turn them into atomic reactors to do good work. That's really what the practice seeks to do. So that's empathy. All right. So what do we know about what CBCT does? Now, most of the people in this room got to see the Trier social stress test this morning, so I'm not going to elaborate. But we upstairs in the Lang lab are beginning to do this, and we've been doing this for years at Emory. We use this, it's a very standardized public, it's a stress test in a lab. People have to give a little public speech and subtract a bunch of ugly numbers. And when you do that, as the subject, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your stress hormones go up, and these very damaging immune system chemicals go up too, right? These things, it's called inflammation. It's this whole system in your body that when it's elevated, especially when it's elevated chronically, as is the case with many of us in this room, it damages the blood vessels of your heart. It damages your pancreas, so you begin to get diabetes problems. It damages your mind, so you begin to get anxious and depressed and exhausted. And it sets you up for cancer, depression, and heart disease over time, and diabetes, right? So this stress, this response we get to stress where we activate these immune system inflammatory processes is clearly part of the biology of why unhappiness, anger, depression, stress, over time, on average, make people unhappy, depressed, sick, and dead, right? So we can model that in this little experiment, and we have shown that the first big study we did, we took young people, college kids, and showed that the more the kids practiced CBCT, this compassion training, we put them in that stressor, and their stress responses go, right? And all the inflammation goes down, and they're not as upset. And it's very, very striking, right? So then, having that information in hand, we realized that if we're going to try to help young people, who do you want to help? Well, what you'd really like to do is help the people that are most in need of help. And we know that young people that are exposed to neglect, to trauma early in life, end up, that terrible negative experience programs their brains and bodies in ways where this inflammation is always up, all the time. It's been shown study after study. If you have early adversity, on average, you're going to walk through your life like an inflammatory time bomb. So we had the opportunity to then do CBCT, compassion training, in a very, very rough group of teenage foster kids. Foster kids in most states, if you age out of foster care at age 18, you'll be on the street 50% of the time within a year. Rates of mental illness are sky high. Rates of physical illness are catastrophic. It's a catastrophe. These are kids who have sunk to the bottom of the world of early life adversity, neglect, and abandonment. And so we actually did a study down in Atlanta. We were so far down into the wrong side of town, we couldn't even get them to deliver pizza. Domino's would not come, where we had to go to teach these kids. The first class or two, people brought knives to class. They brought guns to class. We almost had a gang war. They had two different compassion classes. Formed gangs. We're going to go at each other. Wild. We found exactly the same thing. In these kids, the more they practiced, the lower these markers of stress and inflammation went down. And some of these kids had just transformative experiences. There's a nice little research link here. I encourage you to grab it as you go out. They actually have some of the things the kids said after they'd received the training. So how? And I'm running out of time, but I just want to show you, how is it the case that doing this turns down these inflammatory chemicals, these things that damage our health? Well, we know that CBCT did something else. So look at this. These are all faces, and there is a huge literature showing that your ability to rapidly and accurately identify those emotions is very much linked to your ability to feel empathy for other people. So people, for instance, criminals, people with autism, sometimes people with depression, they're really poor at this. They have problems recognizing, what does her face tell me? Does it tell me, shut up, I'm bored? Does it tell me, oh, I'm interested? Makes a big difference, right? I live or die on how I read these things, right? So we had a nice idea of doing this before and after meditation, compassion training. So here we go. Is that a man or a woman? Okay, even that's not so easy. You want a little bit more time? Okay, hate to break it to you guys. It's a woman. All right, here we go. Now, what's the emotion? Playful. Playful is the answer. Okay, so imagine being in a brain scanner and having to go through a whole bunch of those before and after you get meditation training, compassion training. Well, we found this remarkable thing. The people that got compassion training got much better at that task compared to people that went to a health discussion group. They became more accurate at reading people's subtle facial expressions, and they did it by increasing activity in these key brain areas that we know are absolutely essential for the ability to do this. Our ability to understand, you know, what's on the dean's mind this morning has a lot to do with our ability of these brain areas to work optimally. So we have this evidence that the compassion training actually changes the brain, and we know that the more people's brains lit up from the first time to the second time, the better they got at the task. So it really seems that we could say that compassion training changes people's brain functioning in ways that make them more empathically in tuned, more socially aware. I think that's why you get this reduction in stress hormones, frankly, and inflammation. Anybody that was in the TSST demonstration today, you know, you become more aware. The panel raises half an eyebrow, you know, they're a little bit ambivalent. All through life, you know, what you're basically doing is seeing that. I think the training is helping you see openings in people that can then be turned to the good. So, I don't even need 5 minutes. So on the horizon for CBCT, so what are we thinking about? Well, obviously there's a lot of health opportunities here, health potential, things we can do. For the work that we're trying to gear up in Arizona, we're really especially interested in focusing on young people. Geshe Lobsang and I made a commitment about 5 years ago, despite the fact that neither one of us are children researchers per se, that we were so moved by what we saw in the foster care world that we were going to really commit ourselves as sort of a life commitment to try to bring this to kids that really, really need it. Some of the stories we heard were so powerful. I tear up thinking about them. So we are working on several projects right now in the Norton School in collaboration with psychiatry, looking at CBCT. The first is in collaboration with Ann Mastergeorge, looking on the question of whether or not we might be able to train mothers of children with autism in CBCT and then study the behavior and biology of the children. Because one of the things that the Norton School is trying to tell us is that how I treat Jim is not just a social thing, it's a biological thing. How we interact, if we interact a lot, is going to change how his immune system works. I've had 2 hours, I'd tell you all about it. It's unbelievable. We need to think about our interactions with each other as both poisons and medicines. And if we do that, we're really on the right track. So we want to know, can we use CBCT as a medicine to tune up that interaction between mothers and children? And then, as I say, not look at the mother as the primary outcome, but look at the kid. And then the other thing that we've been doing, and Lynn Borden apologizes for not being here today. She's at some big meeting somewhere. But as she often is, the leader of AZ Reach, in collaboration with the McClellan Institute, is we are actively working to bring CBCT studies into one group home foster care to try to really extend the work we've been doing in Emory. And then also in collaboration with Ben's Bells to look at whether or not we might be able to get it into the classroom. Again, with this idea of looking not just what does it do to individual biology or behavior, what does it do to group processes in ways that foster health, right? That's one of the far frontiers of what we need to understand to improve our health care. And the Norton School is really at the forefront of trying to make this happen. Okay, come on, buddy. No, I think died. I've only got one more slide. So, slides died. There's only 2 more slides. So, you know, if I were to conclusion, the conclusion is, and I have a slide you have to imagine of all these guys marching around in military uniforms, right? We're extremely good at fighting enemies, when we understand who the enemy is. If we had that same perception about these internal enemies and the price we're paying, we would be remarkably effective at coping with it, because we as a species, we like our enemies and we like to fight them, right? The second point is, in my final statement, that means really we are fighting the wrong enemy. All of us are. And to the degree that we realize that and can begin to focus our attention on the real enemy, and this isn't just Buddhism, this is science. We know this from medical health, tons of studies. To that degree, not only as individuals, but as a species, we're going to have marked increases in health. So with that, I'm out of time. I'll thank you. Do we have time for questions?
We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Okay.
Comments. Fixing the machine.
Yeah, it got locked up. Oh, well. Yes, sir.
Two quick ones. Being from the business world, the home office, the move to home office,
Yes.
with what I've seen as being, I'm involved in both home office and head office, and usually going out of the office, so I have at home.
Yeah.
But I've actually seen different changes with people and how they used to be when they were interacting or could read other people.
Yes.
And when they can't read them.
Yes.
Because they're not there.
Yes.
So which is why I've also think we've seen some of the face, the different things coming up on the technology side. So just a quick comment on that, I think that's an important corporate area.
Yes, absolutely.
Which you all probably know. The other one is gaming with the early kids, the younger kids, and even as it's that one group, it's ranging from, for the more violent ones, 14 to roughly 32 or so.
Yes.
In that area, is that anywhere involved in some of the areas you study about how that anger, that pseudo-anger, it's real anger, but I see it with a couple of my own kids.
Yeah, they're practicing, they're using a virtual world to practice negative emotions I do not study that, but it's interesting you say that, because what we have often thought of doing, and in fact we started this in Atlanta a few years ago, we thought that to teach kids the compassion training, we were going to have to rely on gaming technology. So we had this whole thing rolled out where we thought that they would only understand it if we had some kind of video game sort of format. What was remarkable was, because we could never quite figure out how to get that flying, at the end of the day we just did the meditation and the kids took to it. So it's really interesting. But I do think that there are, it's a great area of interest of mine about whether or not some of these gaming platforms may offer, and of course other people exploring this, but are there platforms that would be engaging enough that kids would do it, but would have, developmentally more positive things? It's a very interesting question. We know that what people do in virtual reality impacts the real world, because virtual reality gets real enough and you activate the emotions, you're laying down those pathways, especially in childhood. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir. Yes, yes. It's so this is the key question, right? It's a great, the question of, foster kids in particular, right? They've been damaged, and so they've got real trust issues, and often have striking lack of empathy in many ways. Of course, when they're young, underneath that, it's just this completely broken heart. It's unbearable to even think about. So, I made a comment that Geshe Lobsang and I, neither one of us are child specialists, but there was one particular thing that made us decide to go into this, and we had done the first work in the foster care world. One girl in particular had this unbelievably transformative experience. She'd gone from being almost kicked out of school, real hellraiser, a lot of potential, smart, but angry, nasty, to having this fairly rapid, profound shift back in school, had figured out how to deal with her mom some, had gone to the judge and said, look, this CBCT thing, it changed how I thought about things. So we interviewed her for about an hour and a half, and she said something that's directly germane to what you're talking about, which is, she said, we go to we have all these therapy sessions, all these things, people looking at us and trying to help us. She said, the thing that rocked my world about CBCT was that it was a private, internal thing. That it wasn't about me having to go out and be empathic with somebody, or go out and deal with my mom, or deal with that so-and-so that I want to put a knife in. That it was kind of theoretical. That it was internal, so I controlled it. and B, that it allowed me to create a space. To your thing about gaming, right? Essentially, it created an internal gaming space, right, where she was able to try these things out. And the thing she said that hooked us was she said, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a sense of control over these relationships and these emotions. And I could work with it inside myself without everybody getting in my head about it. And so that was, we said, especially in these populations, if we could replicate this might be hugely important for just the reason you said, that you don't have to get people out in front of things what they're not comfortable doing. Yeah. Yes?
As a financial advisor about 20-some years ago, in the retirement area, they said 70% of the men in our culture that have strokes within 90 days of retirement because we bring our young men up to think they are what they do.
Absolutely.
Then a few years ago, in some advanced classes, the statistic was still the same.
Yes.
Have you looked at that particular population, or what goes on in the stroke?
No, we have not looked. So it's a great question. So she said, there are a lot of data showing that guys die. There's a huge death spike at retirement, right? That all of a sudden, meaning in life, purpose in life, is a lifesaver and a life promoter. Even if the meaning is maybe suboptimal, without that, human beings, it's like pulling the rudder off the ship, and you're just listing across the ocean. So older guys retire and they die because they're not who they were anymore. About Schmidt is the most depressing movie. If there's a movie with Jack Nicholson about this, it's just almost unwatchable, but it really gets at this, right, and how he flounders out, and it's just heartbreaking. We have not looked at CBCT in older folks yet. We had actually done a little pilot work in the realm of Alzheimer's disease, and Alzheimer's caregivers. It's a challenging, interesting thing. But you're right, that's a very interesting idea. So, I mean, the sky's the limit on the places where something like this could be of use. It'd be a fascinating study to take guys that were, within a few months of retirement, train them up or not, and look to see whether this would allow them to reconceptualize their world in ways that gave them a sense of purpose, when they stepped out of the job. Yeah, it's really a thing.
Well, 2 years before retirement, we start doing 50 things you love to do.
Yes.
And start directing them.
Well, that same thing, to try to help them maintain a sense of purpose. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. Are most of your measurements qualitative or anecdotal, or do you also do quantitative tests on how much the biology changes, like if the
Quantitative.
cortisol drops or whatever?
Oh, yes. No, we've got a whole lab. So like,
What are you measuring?
so we measure mostly, we mostly measure blood. Now, in some of our studies, we actually get spinal fluid, needle in the back, right? Now, not for this. No. Some of the work we do where we study people that are getting these hardcore inflammatory drugs, we've done that. With the meditation, we mostly draw blood and get saliva, and we draw blood in response to that stress test, where we run people through that stress test, and you look at, here they are, here comes the test, and whoa, up it goes, right? And so absolutely. And then in terms of behavioral stuff, we've done some very interesting work. We're still trying to work our way through analyzing it, where we actually have been using, Violetta Dominguez is in the back, her husband is my dear friend and close collaborator, Matthias Mell, who's developed this amazing technology where this little box captures snippets of what you're doing during the day, just silently turns on and off. And it's allowed him to basically record people's real lives. And we've been looking to see if and how these practices change what people actually say and do. We don't know the answer to that yet. And then we've been doing brain scanning. There's other brain scanning studies that are just now being published that I didn't have time to show you. So we try to be very objective in our assessments because, that's, of course, that's the goal of science, but also because I think it helps people. It gives the area credibility, But the anecdotal reports in the foster kids, that's what break your heart, man. You talk to these kids, and, I remember this big guy, frightening guy. We asked him at the end of it, we said, well, can you give us an example of how this helped you? And he said, well, okay, all right. So today, this guy pissed me off, and I decided I was going to stab him after school. He said, nah. And he said, then my equanimity got in the way. That's literally, he said my equanimity. He didn't quite have the word right. My equanimity got in the way, and I decided maybe I should meditate instead, right? So stuff like that, just really powerful stuff, yeah. Okay, I see my timekeeper. Thank you very much.
there is a class the next period. So before you go, I'm really, thank you, Chuck, for this, for your great talk. And Chuck will be around for further conversation. But I want to pause for this moment to give the Francis McClellan Vision Award. This award is given to honor a community leader who's made significant contribution to the well-being of children, youth, and families in southern Arizona. And it was established to recognize the many contributions of Francis McClellan to improving the lives of people here in Tucson and southern Arizona and in the world. The first recipient was in 2009 when we dedicated the Institute in honor of Francis McClellan, and that award went to Nadine Mathis Basha, who many of you know as one of the major advocates for children, business owner, volunteer. Among the many things that she has accomplished was she founded the Children's Action Alliance, but she was also behind the Proposition 203 in November 2006 that ultimately created First Things First in Arizona, which has really changed the game for young children in our state. And I'm really pleased to introduce the 2012, the second recipient of the Francis McClellan Vision Award, who is Evelyn Carswell Bing. So just Dr. Bing grew up on the East Coast, and she graduated from high school at 16 and was determined to become a teacher, I've been told. And by the age of 20, she was the first person in her family to have finished college, and she began teaching in a small farming community on the East Coast. And in the Second World War, she joined the Navy, where she met her husband. And after the war, they moved to Flagstaff, and in 1952, she became a teacher here in Tucson at one of the elementary schools here. She taught at Prince and Halloway Elementary Schools, and ultimately was the principal at Harrelson and at Walker Elementary. And in 1967, she got her doctorate degree from this university and served on the faculty here and is now emeritus faculty here. And many, the nominations for this came into the committee, and folks, I could just go down a long list of the ways that that Dr. Carswell Bing has been involved in the community. One of our close connections is that she served on the board of the directors of the YWCA here in Tucson, and I think knew Francis McClellan in that way. And what the folks that nominated her said to us was that she paved the way for women and children in many arenas in this community to become active and engaged in the community of Tucson. And the thing that everybody in town owes her a great debt of gratitude for is in 1986 co-founding the Tucson Children's Museum. So it is a great honor to present to you the Francis McClellan Vision Award. Would prefer to spend more time on the science, but
I'm overwhelmed, frankly, that with all the people with whom I have worked to do all the things I have done, that I should be selected to do that. You know, and I know, there are plenty of people in this room who have done just as much as I have in many, many different ways. We always stand on the shoulders of wonderful people who came ahead of us. And I am particularly grateful that Francis McClellan was a friend of mine. Francis helped me when we were dealing with the girls' ranch and the girls who were taken out of their home by their parents because they were unmanageable. We need your process. It's just a little late at this point. Francis helped me when it was time, when I began working on developing the Children's Museum. while I had worked with Francis on the YWCA board, I learned a lot about how to handle people. But when I knew nothing about how to handle books, financial books. And of course, Francis was my right hand again. I love this building and the work you people are doing. I wish that instead of being almost 94, I could be 24, because I'd want to be here with you and working on this, all these wonderful things that I guess I can scarcely believe they're coming. I just wish I could live maybe to be 193. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your contributions, and happy homecoming. And for those of you who are staying for lunch, we'll be in the lobby. And have a great weekend.